You know that sinking feeling when you walk into your own kitchen at 6 a.m. and find a complete stranger making coffee like they own the place? Well, that happened to me last Tuesday. But what my son and his surprise house guest discovered by noon that same day, let me just say it went from awkward breakfast conversation to them packing their dags faster than you've ever seen two people move. Picture this. Perfectly ordinary suburban morning in Millfield Heights, birds chirping outside our bay windows, the smell of fresh coffee that I definitely didn't make, and there she was, a 20-something blonde in my favorite mug, wearing what appeared to be my son's oversized Stanford hoodie, acting like she'd been living here for months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name's Margaret Chen, and at 58, I thought I'd seen every possible way my adult children could surprise me. I was wrong. My husband David had already left for his morning jog, completely oblivious to our unexpected house guest, and I stood there in my bathrobe wondering how exactly I was supposed to handle this situation. The girl couldn't have been older than 25, with perfectly styled beach waves and the kind of confident posture that suggested she was used to getting her way in most situations. "Oh, hi there," she said with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Mrs. Chen. I'm Amber. Tyler's told me so much about you." She gestured around our kitchen like she was giving me a tour of my own home. "I hope you don't mind. I made myself some coffee. Tyler said to make myself comfortable while he grabbed a shower." Mind? I minded everything about this scenario, starting with the fact that my 26-year-old son had apparently moved his girlfriend into our house without so much as a phone call. Tyler had been staying with us temporarily after his lease ended last month, supposedly just for a few weeks while he found a new place. Temporarily had apparently expanded to include bringing home permanent house guests. "I see," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice neutral. "And how long are you planning to stay, Amber?" She laughed, like I'd made some kind of joke. "Oh, Tyler didn't tell you? We're moving in together. Since he's staying here anyway and my roommate situation fell through, he suggested I just move in too. Isn't that sweet? He said his parents were super chill about everything." Super chill, right. I watched her rummage through our refrigerator like she was taking inventory, pulling out eggs and bacon with the familiarity of someone who'd already made herself completely at home. The audacity was breathtaking, but what really got to me was the casual way she assumed we'd just go along with this arrangement that we'd never agreed to. "Tyler's in the shower, you said," I asked, pouring myself coffee from the pot she'd made. At least she'd made it strong. "Mm-hmm. He'll be down in a few. I thought I'd surprise him with breakfast. Do you guys have any of that fancy cheese, the kind with the herbs? Tyler mentioned you always have really good cheese." She was already opening cabinet doors, clearly on a mission to locate our entire pantry. That's when Tyler appeared, hair still damp from his shower, wearing a sheepish grin that I recognized from every time he'd gotten caught doing something he knew he shouldn't have done. "Morning, Mom. I see you've met Amber." "I have indeed," I said, setting down my coffee cup with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. "Tyler, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Amber looked between us with the kind of alert expression that suggested she was picking up on the tension, but choosing to ignore it. "I'll just keep working on breakfast," she said cheerfully. "Tyler, babe, where do you guys keep the good olive oil?" Tyler shot her a warning look that she completely missed, then followed me into the hallway. "Mom, before you say anything, I can explain." "Can you? Because what I'm seeing is that you've moved your girlfriend into our house without asking, without discussing it with your father and me, and without any consideration for the fact that this is our home, not a college dormitory." I kept my voice low, but I made sure he could hear exactly how serious I was. "It's not like that," Tyler said, running his hand through his damp hair. "Amber's lease ended and her roommate bailed on their new place. She had nowhere else to go, and since I'm already here temporarily, I figured it wouldn't be a big deal if she crashed here too for a few weeks." "You figured it wouldn't be a big deal?" I repeated. "Tyler, you're 26 years old. When exactly were you planning to have this conversation with us?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I was going to talk to you guys today, actually. Amber just needed somewhere to stay last night, and I didn't want to wake you up to ask permission." Permission that you clearly didn't think you needed anyway, I pointed out. Tyler, your girlfriend is in there acting like she lives here. She's going through our refrigerator, asking about our cheese selection, making breakfast like this is her kitchen. She's just trying to be helpful, Tyler said defensively. Amber's really great once you get to know her. She's got this amazing energy, and she's super organized. She can actually help around the house while she's here. I stared at my son, wondering when exactly he'd lost touch with reality. Tyler, we don't need help around the house. We need our adult children to respect our space and our right to have a say in who lives under our roof. Before Tyler could respond, Amber called out from the kitchen, Tyler, babe, your mom's got some amazing stuff in here. Is this truffle oil? And oh my God, look at this spice collection. Your parents have seriously good taste. Tyler winced. She's just excited, Mom. Amber comes from a pretty basic family situation. She's not used to nice things. That comment hit me wrong in about 6 different ways, but before I could address it, David came through the front door, sweaty from his run and looking confused by the domestic scene playing out in our kitchen. Who's the girl making eggs?
He asked, pulling out his earbuds. That's Amber, Tyler said quickly. My girlfriend. She's going to be staying with us for a while. David looked at me, then at Tyler, then back at me. Since when? Since last night, apparently, I said. Tyler decided to move her in without mentioning it to us. Tyler, David's voice carried that particular tone that meant our son was about to get a lecture. What exactly is going on here? But before Tyler could answer, Amber appeared in the hallway, bright smile still firmly in place. Mr. Chen, right? I'm Amber. Tyler's told me so much about you. I hope it's okay that I made breakfast. I wanted to contribute since you're letting me stay here. David looked at her, then at Tyler, then at me again. I could see him trying to process this information while still cooling down from his run. Letting you stay here? He repeated slowly. Yeah, it's so generous of you guys, Amber continued, apparently oblivious to the growing tension. Tyler said you wouldn't mind at all, and honestly, this place is perfect. So much better than the tiny apartment I was sharing with my roommate. And the kitchen is amazing. I'm definitely going to enjoy cooking here. The silence that followed was deafening. David has always been slower to anger than I am, but I could see the moment when the full situation hit him. Our son had moved his girlfriend into our house without asking. She was talking about cooking here like she'd signed a lease. And Tyler was standing there looking like he hoped the ground would swallow him up. Tyler, David said very carefully, I think we need to have a family meeting, right now. But what about breakfast? Amber asked, looking genuinely confused by the sudden shift in mood. I made enough for everyone. That's when I realized that this girl genuinely didn't understand what she'd done wrong. In her mind, Tyler had invited her to move in with his parents, and we were all supposed to be thrilled about this arrangement. She wasn't being malicious or manipulative. She was just completely clueless about appropriate boundaries. Amber, I said as gently as I could manage, why don't you go ahead and eat? Tyler needs to talk with his father and me for a few minutes. She shrugged and headed back to the kitchen, leaving the 3 of us standing in the hallway, having the kind of whispered argument that every parent of adult children is familiar with. What were you thinking? David asked Tyler, his voice tight with controlled frustration. I was thinking that my girlfriend needed a place to stay and we have extra room. But his defensive tone was starting to crack. It's not permanent, just until she gets back on her feet. How long is that supposed to take? I asked. A week? A month? 6 months? Tyler, this is a huge imposition, and the fact that you didn't even discuss it with us shows a complete lack of respect for our home and our marriage. Your marriage? Tyler looked confused. Yes, our marriage. Your mother and I are entitled to privacy in our own home. We're entitled to decide who lives here and for how long. We're entitled to have a relationship and a household that doesn't revolve around our adult children's housing crises. That seemed to hit Tyler in a way that our other arguments hadn't. He looked genuinely surprised, like the idea that his parents might want some space and independence had never occurred to him. From the kitchen, we could hear Amber humming while she ate breakfast, apparently completely unbothered by the family drama unfolding 10 feet away. The sound was actually making the whole situation worse, highlighting just how comfortable she'd made herself in a house where she'd spent exactly one night. "Look," Tyler said, his voice getting quieter, "I get that I should have asked first. That was wrong. But she's already here and she doesn't have anywhere else to go. Can't she just stay for a few days while we figure something out?" "Tyler, the problem isn't just that she's here. The problem is how she's acting like she lives here. She's going through our refrigerator, reorganizing our kitchen, talking about cooking here regularly. This isn't someone crashing on a couch for a few days. This is someone who thinks she's moved in permanently." David nodded. "And the bigger problem is that you thought this was okay to do without asking us. What if my mother and I had decided to move someone into your apartment without discussing it with you first?" "That's different," Tyler started to say, then stopped. Even he could see how weak that argument was. "Is it?" I asked. "How exactly is it different?" Tyler didn't have an answer for that, which was probably the first sign that he was starting to understand the scoop of what he'd done. But understanding and fixing are two different things, and we still had Amber in our kitchen acting like she'd won some kind of housing lottery. "Okay," Tyler said finally, "I messed up. I should have asked first. But what do you want me to do now? Tell her she has to leave immediately?" "That's exactly what we want you to do," David said.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Today, both of you need to find somewhere else to stay. Tyler's eyes widened. "Both of us? Dad, come on, I've been staying here for weeks. This is about Amber, not me." "No, Tyler, it's about both of you," I said. "It's about the fact that you're 26 years old and you're still making decisions like a teenager. It's about the fact that you brought someone into our home without permission and then acted like we were being unreasonable for being upset about it." The conversation was interrupted by Amber calling out from the kitchen. "This breakfast is getting cold. Are you guys almost done with your meeting?" The three of us looked at each other, and I could see that David was thinking the same thing I was. This girl had no idea that she was about to be asked to leave. She was sitting in our kitchen eating breakfast, probably planning what she was going to cook for dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that her temporary living situation was about to become very temporary indeed. "We need to tell her," David said quietly. "I'll tell her," Tyler said, but he looked about as enthusiastic about that conversation as someone facing root canal surgery. "We'll all tell her," I corrected. "Together. This is a family decision, and she needs to understand that it's not negotiable." We walked back into the kitchen where Amber had made herself a plate of eggs and bacon and was scrolling through her phone while she ate. She looked up with a bright smile when we entered. "This tastes amazing, if I do say so myself," she said. "Tyler, babe, your parents have such good ingredients to work with. I'm thinking maybe tonight I could make that pasta dish I was telling you about, the one with the sun-dried tomatoes and goat cheese." Tyler looked at his parents, then at Amber, then down at the floor. "Actually, Amber, we need to talk." Something in his tone must have finally gotten through to her because her smile faltered slightly. "Talk about what?" "About living arrangements," I said, taking the lead since Tyler seemed to have lost his nerve. "Amber, I think there's been some miscommunication here. Tyler didn't have permission to invite you to stay in our home, and we're not able to accommodate long-term house guests right now." The change in Amber's expression was immediate and dramatic. The bright, confident smile disappeared, replaced by a look of confusion and hurt that was actually painful to watch. "Long-term?" she said. "Tyler told me it would be fine. He said his parents were cool about everything and wouldn't mind having me around." "Tyler was wrong," David said firmly. "He should have discussed this with us before making any invitations." Amber looked at Tyler with an expression that could have melted steel. "You didn't ask them?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "I was going to ask them today. I didn't think it would be such a big deal." "Such a big deal?" Amber's voice was getting higher. "Tyler,
I gave up my lease because you said I could move in here instead. My stuff is in boxes at your friend's place because you said this was all worked out. That was news to all of us. I looked at Tyler, who was now looking genuinely panicked. You gave up your lease? I asked Amber. Last week, she said, her eyes starting to fill with tears. Tyler said it was stupid to pay rent on a place when I could just move in here instead. He said his parents had tons of room and wouldn't mind having another person around the house. The silence that followed was the kind that makes everyone in the room wish they were anywhere else. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, David looked like he was reconsidering every parenting decision we'd ever made, and Amber looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under her entire life plan. Amber, I said carefully, I'm sorry that Tyler gave you incorrect information about our living situation, but David and I were never consulted about this arrangement, and we can't have permanent house guests. Permanent? She repeated. I'm not trying to move in permanently. Just until I can get back on my feet. Maybe a few months. A few months. I caught David's eye and saw my own thoughts reflected there. This was even worse than we had imagined. That's not possible, David said firmly. You'll need to make other arrangements. Amber looked around the table like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was all a joke. When no one did, her face crumpled. I don't have other arrangements, she said quietly. Tyler, you said this was all set up. You said your parents were excited to meet me. I never said they were excited, Tyler protested weakly. You said they wouldn't mind, Amber shot back. You said they had plenty of space and liked seeing young people around. You said your mom would probably enjoy having another woman in the house. Each accusation made Tyler look smaller and more miserable. I was starting to feel genuinely sorry for Amber, who was clearly the victim of Tyler's complete inability to think through consequences. Tyler, is it true that you told Amber she could move in here permanently?
Not permanently, he said, just temporarily, until she figured out her next move. How temporarily? David asked. Tyler mumbled something we couldn't hear. How long, Tyler? I pressed. A few months, maybe, he admitted. The room fell silent again. Amber was crying now, quiet tears that she was trying to wipe away without anyone noticing. Tyler looked like he was about to cry too, and David and I were left to figure out how to handle a situation that was much more complicated than we'd originally thought. Because here's the thing about being parents to adult children. Sometimes you end up being the bad guys in situations where there really aren't any good guys. Amber wasn't a villain for believing what Tyler told her. Tyler wasn't exactly a villain either, just incredibly immature and thoughtless. But David and I weren't villains for wanting control over our own home. Amber, I said gently, I understand this puts you in a difficult position. But Tyler should never have made promises about our home without talking to us first. She nodded, still crying. I know. I get it. I just don't know what I'm going to do now. That's when Tyler finally found his backbone. Amber can stay with me at Jake's place, he said. Jake's got that big apartment, and he's always said I could crash there if I needed to. For how long? Amber asked. Tyler looked uncomfortable again. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Tyler, David said, this is exactly the kind of non-planning that got you into the situation in the first place. You can't just keep moving from place to place without any long-term plan. What do you want me to do? Tyler asked, frustration finally showing in his voice. I'm trying to help my girlfriend, and everyone's acting like I'm some kind of criminal. You're not a criminal, I said. But you are acting like someone who expects other people to solve your problems for you. Amber needs a place to live. You need a place to live. Those are your problems to solve, not ours. The truth was, watching this whole situation unfold was making me realize things about my son that I hadn't wanted to see. Tyler had always been charming and sweet and easy to help. When he needed money for college, we provided it. When he needed a place to stay after graduation, we offered our guest room. When he lost his job last year, we helped him with his car payments until he found something new. We thought we were being supportive parents. But looking at this situation, I was starting to wonder if we'd actually been enabling him to avoid growing up.
Because a truly mature adult doesn't move his girlfriend into his parents' house without asking. A truly mature adult doesn't make promises about other people's homes without checking with those other people first. How long do we have? Amber asked quietly. David and I looked at each other. We could have said immediately, which would have been within our rights, but this girl had been led to believe she had somewhere to live, and she was clearly not prepared for the reality of being homeless. Tonight, I said. You can stay tonight, but tomorrow you need to be somewhere else. Both of us? Tyler asked. Both of you, David confirmed. Tyler, it's time for you to figure out your own living situation instead of relying on your parents to provide housing while you make poor decisions. Tyler opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Maybe he was finally starting to understand that this wasn't just about Amber. This was about his pattern of making choices without considering consequences, expecting other people to bail him out when things went wrong. Fine, he said. We'll be out tomorrow. But I could tell from his tone that he still didn't really get it. He sounded like a teenager being punished for breaking curfew, not like an adult who understood that actions have consequences. And that worried me, because Tyler's problems weren't going to be solved by finding him a different couch to sleep on. As Amber and Tyler headed upstairs to figure out their next move, David and I sat at the kitchen table looking at the remains of the breakfast she had made for everyone. How did we raise a 26-year-old who thinks this behavior is acceptable? David asked. I don't know, but clearly we did something wrong along the way. The thing is, Tyler had always been charming and sweet and easy to help. When he needed money for college, we provided it. When he needed a place to stay after graduation, we offered our guest room. When he lost his job last year, we helped him with his car payments until he found something new. We thought we were being supportive parents. But looking at the situation, I was starting to wonder if we'd actually been enabling him to avoid growing up. Because a truly mature adult doesn't move his girlfriend into his parents' house without asking. A truly mature adult doesn't make promises about other people's homes without checking with those other people first. What do you think is going to happen? David asked. I think they're going to end up at his friend Jake's place for a few days, and then Jake's going to get tired of having house guests, and Tyler's going to call us asking if they can come back. And what are we going to say? I thought about that for a long moment. We're going to say no. David nodded. Good, because this can't become a pattern. But even as I said it, I had a sinking feeling that Tyler hadn't learned anything from this experience.
He was going to see us as the unreasonable parents who kicked out his homeless girlfriend, not as the people setting appropriate boundaries in their own home. What Tyler didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that David and I had been having serious conversations about our future for months. We'd been talking about selling the house, maybe buying something smaller in a warmer climate. We'd been talking about what we wanted our retirement to look like, and those conversations definitely didn't include providing free housing for our adult children and their significant others indefinitely. Tyler also didn't know that his younger sister Sarah had been asking if she could move back home after her lease ended next month, and we'd already decided to say no to her too. Not because we didn't love our children, but because we'd realized that our house had become a revolving door for adult kids who couldn't quite figure out how to be fully independent. As I cleaned up Amber's breakfast dishes, I found myself thinking about all the conversations David and I had been having lately about boundaries, about enabling, about the difference between helping our children and preventing them from growing up. This morning's situation was just the latest example of a pattern we'd been seeing for months. But here's what really bothered me about the whole thing. Tyler's assumption that we'd be fine with his decision. Not just that we'd go along with it reluctantly, but that we'd actually be happy about having a strange young woman move into our home indefinitely. That suggested a level of disconnect from our actual feelings and needs that was honestly pretty disturbing. When had Tyler stopped thinking about us as people with our own lives and started thinking about us as just parents whose job was to solve his problems? When had our homes stopped being our private space and started being a resource he could access whenever convenient? These were the questions I was still thinking about when Tyler and Amber came back downstairs an hour later with a plan that was about as well thought out as everything else Tyler had been doing lately. Okay,
Tyler announced. "We're going to stay at Jake's place for a couple weeks while Amber looks for a new apartment. Jake said it's totally fine." Did Jake actually say it's totally fine, or did you tell him it would just be for a couple of days and hope for the best? David asked. Tyler's hesitation was answer enough. "Tyler," I said, "you're doing it again. You're making plans that depend on other people's generosity without actually confirming that they're okay with those plans." "Jake won't mind," Tyler insisted. "He's got plenty of space." "That's not the point," David said. "The point is that you need to actually ask people before you assume they'll help you. You need to have honest conversations about expectations and timelines." Amber was listening to this exchange with growing understanding. "Tyler, did you actually ask your parents if I could move in here? Or did you just assume they'd be okay with it?" Tyler looked cornered. "I was gonna ask them." "But you didn't ask them before you told me it was okay," she pressed. "I knew they'd say yes," Tyler said weakly. "Except they didn't say yes," Amber pointed out. "They said no. So you didn't know anything." I had to give Amber credit for finally seeing the situation clearly. She might be young and a little clueless about boundaries, but she wasn't stupid. "Look," Tyler said, getting defensive again, "I was trying to help you. Your roommate bailed, you needed a place to stay, and I thought my parents would be cool about it. I'm sorry I was wrong." "You're sorry you were wrong?" Amber repeated slowly. "Tyler, I gave up my lease because you said this was all arranged. I turned down other housing options because you said I could live here. I'm not homeless because you were wrong. I'm homeless because you lied." "I didn't lie," Tyler protested. "I just didn't ask permission first." "Same thing," Amber said flatly. "If you tell someone they can count on something that you can't actually provide, that's lying." I found myself impressed with Amber's clarity. She was handling this situation with more maturity than my 26-year-old son was managing. "So what's the plan?" David asked. "We'll figure it out," Tyler said, which wasn't really an answer. "Tyler," I said carefully, "figuring it out means making actual plans with real timelines and backup options. It means having honest conversations with Jake about how long you can stay and what he expects from you as house guests. It means Amber actively looking for her own place instead of just hoping something will work out." "I am looking for my own place," Amber said. "I've been looking for weeks. Do you know how hard it is to find an affordable apartment in this area?" She had a point. The local rental market was brutal, especially for someone young without a lot of rental history or a high-paying job. "What's your budget?" I asked her. "About $800 a month, maybe $1,000 if I can find a roommate." David and I exchanged glances. $800 wouldn't get you a decent studio apartment in our area, let alone anything suitable for sharing with a roommate. "Have you considered looking in neighboring towns?" David asked gently. "The market's a lot more affordable about 30 minutes north of here." "But then I'd have to commute. My job is downtown and I don't have a car." Another piece of the puzzle. Amber wasn't just young and housing insecure. She was also carless in a suburban area with limited public transportation. Tyler had invited her to move in with us without considering any of the practical realities of her situation. "What about your family?" I asked. "Can you stay with them temporarily while you figure out your housing situation?" Amber's face closed down immediately. "That's not an option." I didn't push, but I could tell from her reaction that her family situation was probably complicated in ways that made Tyler's offer seem like a lifeline rather than just a convenience. "Okay," I said, "let's think about this practically. Amber, you need affordable housing that's accessible to your job without a car. Tyler, you need to stop making promises about other people's resources."
And both of you need to understand that being adults means solving these problems yourselves instead of expecting other people to provide solutions. "But what are we supposed to do right now?" Tyler asked. "Today." "Today, you're going to call Jake and have an honest conversation about how long you can stay and what he expects from you," David said. "You're going to research affordable housing options in the area. You're going to make a realistic budget and timeline for getting back on your feet. And you're going to stop expecting other people to solve your problems for you." Tyler nodded, but I could tell he was still thinking about this as a temporary setback rather than a wake-up call about his approach to adult responsibilities. As they got ready to leave the next morning,
I found myself watching Amber pack her things with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. She seemed like a decent person who'd gotten caught up in Tyler's inability to think through consequences. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that she'd been perfectly happy to move into our house without any discussion with us, and that suggested its own problems with boundaries and communication. "Mrs. Chen," Amber said as she loaded her suitcase into Tyler's car, "I want to apologize for the way this all happened. Tyler told me it was all arranged, but I should have insisted on talking to you and Mr. Chen myself before assuming I could move in." "I appreciate that, Amber," I said. "I hope you're able to find a good housing situation soon." She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "Yeah, me too." Tyler gave us both awkward hugs and promised to call later in the week. As they drove away, David and I stood in our driveway feeling like we'd just weathered some kind of storm. "Do you think we handled that right?" David asked. "I think we handled it the only way we could," I said. "But I have a feeling this isn't over." I was right, but not in the way I expected. What happened next would make that awkward breakfast conversation look like a minor disagreement, because Tyler and Amber were about to discover something about our family situation that would change everything they thought they knew about why we couldn't accommodate houseguests. 3 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Tyler, and he sounded panicked. "Mom, we need to talk. Can Amber and I come over, like right now?" "Tyler, what's wrong?" "Just, can we come over, please? There's something we need to discuss, and it can't wait." An hour later, they were sitting at our kitchen table again, but the dynamic was completely different. Tyler looked stunned, and Amber looked like she'd been crying. "Mom, Dad," Tyler said, his voice shaking slightly, "we need to know why you really didn't want us staying here." David and I looked at each other. "We told you why," I said carefully. "No," Tyler said. "You told us about boundaries and respect and all that, but that's not the real reason, is it?" My heart started beating faster. "What are you talking about?" Amber pulled out her phone and showed us a photo. It was a screenshot of a real estate listing, and it was our house. "We were driving by yesterday to pick up something Tyler left behind, and we saw the realtor taking pictures in the front yard," Amber said quietly. "So we looked it up online." The listing had gone live 2 days ago. For sale, beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in desirable Millfield Heights neighborhood. Motivated sellers, immediate possession possible. Tyler stared at us with an expression I'd never seen before. "You're selling the house. You've been planning to sell the house this whole time, haven't you?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "How long?" Tyler asked. "How long have you been planning this?" David cleared his throat. "We've been discussing it for about 6 months." 6 months, Tyler repeated. "So when I asked to stay here temporarily while I found a new place, you knew you were selling the house?" "We weren't sure yet. We were still talking about it." "But you listed it 2 days after we left. That means you already had the realtor lined up, already had the paperwork ready. You didn't decide to sell the house because we moved in. You decided not to tell us you were selling the house." She was right, and we all knew it. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Tyler asked, and his voice was small now, hurt in a way that cut right through me. Because the truth was complicated. Because David and I had been talking about selling the house and moving to a retirement community in Florida for months, but we hadn't figured out how to tell the kids yet. Because we were tired of being the fallback option every time one of our adult children had a housing crisis. Because we wanted to start the next chapter of our lives without worrying about whether our guest rooms would be occupied by adult children who couldn't quite manage full independence. "We were planning to tell you soon," David said. "We just hadn't figured out the right timing." "The right timing," Tyler said bitterly. "So you thought the right timing was to let me think you were just being mean about boundaries instead of explaining that you literally won't have a house for me to stay in much longer anyway."
"Tyler," I started, but he held up his hand. "Do you know what we've been doing for the past 3 days?" he asked. "We've been beating ourselves up for imposing on you. Amber's been apologizing to me for causing problems with my family. I've been feeling terrible for disrespecting your space. And the whole time, the real issue was that you're moving to Florida and didn't want to deal with telling us? That's not fair, David said. The boundary issues were real regardless of our moving plans. Were they? Tyler asked. Or were you just looking for an excuse to kick us out without having to explain that you're abandoning ship? Tyler, I said sharply, we are not abandoning anything. We are 58 years old, and we have the right to decide where we want to live and how we want to spend our retirement. I'm not saying you don't have the right, Tyler said. I'm saying you should have told me. Instead of letting me think I was this horrible son who brought home a girlfriend without permission, you could have just said, Tyler, we're selling the house, so you need to find somewhere else to stay. Amber had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. The real estate listing says immediate possession possible, she said. How immediate? David and I looked at each other again. The buyers want to close in 30 days, I admitted. 30 days, Tyler repeated. So even if we hadn't had the whole fight about boundaries and respect, I would have had to move out in 30 days anyway. Yes, I said quietly. Tyler put his head in his hands. This is unreal. Mom, Dad, do you understand how this looks from our perspective? From where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been planning this major life change for months, and instead of including your family in the conversation, you decided to use us as an excuse to avoid having difficult conversations about your future plans. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, because as much as I wanted to deny it, there was truth in what Tyler was saying. David and I had been talking about this move for months, but we'd kept putting off the conversation with our kids because we knew it would be complicated and emotional. That's not how it happened, I said, but even I could hear how weak that sounded. Isn't it? Amber asked quietly. Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, when Tyler asked to stay here temporarily, you could have said, that won't work because we're moving. Instead, you let him stay for weeks without mentioning your plans. And when I showed up, you made it about boundaries and respect instead of just explaining that you literally don't have room for house guests because you're in the process of relocating. She was absolutely right, and that made it worse somehow. This 25-year-old girl could see through our rationalization more clearly than we could. We weren't trying to deceive anyone, David said. We were still finalizing our decision. But you weren't still finalizing it, Tyler pointed out. You already had the realtor. You already had professional photos taken. You already had the listing written up and ready to go live. Dad, this isn't something you decided last week. This is something you've been actively working on for months while letting me think I had a temporary home here. The worst part was that Tyler was right. We had been working on this for months. We'd been meeting with realtors, researching retirement communities in Florida, getting the house ready for sale. We'd been having detailed conversations about our timeline and our budget and our plans for the future. The only thing we hadn't done was tell our children. Why Florida? Tyler asked suddenly. And why didn't you think we'd want to know about such a huge change in your lives? David looked at me, and I could see him struggling with how much to reveal. The truth was, we'd chosen Florida partly because it was far enough away that our adult children couldn't just drop by whenever they needed something. We loved Tyler and Sarah, but we were exhausted by the constant stream of requests for help, for money, for advice, for housing. We wanted to start fresh somewhere where we could just be Margaret and David again, instead of always being Tyler's parents or Sarah's parents first. We chose Florida because the cost of living is lower, the weather is better, and we found a retirement community that offers the kind of lifestyle we want. What kind of lifestyle? Asked Tyler. Independent, David said. We want to be independent. The word hit Tyler like a physical blow. Independent from what? From us? Not from you, I said quickly. Just independent in general. Tyler, your father and I have been supporting other people in various ways for 30 years. We raised you and Sarah. We helped both of you through college. We've provided emergency housing and financial support whenever either of you needed it. We're tired. We want to focus on our own relationship and our own goals for a while. So this is about us being burdens, Tyler said flatly. You're not burdens, David said. But Tyler, you're 26 years old and you're still asking us to solve your housing problems. Sarah's 28 and she still calls us for money when her budget doesn't work out. We love you both, but we're ready for a phase of life where we're not constantly managing
other people's crises. Other people's crises? Tyler stared at us like we'd grown second heads. Dad, I lost my job during the pandemic. The rental market is insane right now. These aren't crises I created on purpose. No, I agreed, but they're crises you expect us to solve for you.
Tyler, when your lease ended, your first thought wasn't to find a new place or to move in with friends or to figure out a solution on your own. Your first thought was to move back in with your parents. And when Amber needed housing, your first thought wasn't to help her find her own place or to figure out what you could afford together. Your first thought was to move her in with your parents too. Because I thought you wouldn't mind, Tyler said defensively. But you didn't ask, Amber said quietly. Tyler, you didn't ask because you assumed they'd say yes. And you assumed they'd say yes because you think of their house as your backup plan instead of as their private home. Tyler looked at Amber like she'd betrayed him. Whose side are you on here? I'm not on anyone's side, she said. I'm just trying to understand what actually happened. And what actually happened is that your parents have been planning a major life change, and instead of being honest about it, they let us think this was about something else entirely. She turned to look at David and me. But Tyler's also right that he's been treating your house like his personal safety net, instead of recognizing that you might have your own plans and priorities. It was like having a 25-year-old therapist dissect our entire family dynamic right there at the kitchen table. And the most uncomfortable part was that she was absolutely correct about everything. So what happens now? Tyler asked. Now you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live instead of the indefinite timeline you thought you had, David said, and now you know why. And now we all have to figure out how to have honest conversations about our expectations and boundaries instead of making assumptions and then getting angry when those assumptions turn out to be wrong, I added. Tyler nodded slowly, but I could see he was still processing everything. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When you and Dad decided to move to Florida, did you think about how that would affect Sarah and me? Did you consider that we might want to have input on such a big decision? The question caught me off guard because the honest answer was no, we hadn't really considered their input. We'd thought about how to tell them, and we'd worried about how they'd react, but we hadn't actually thought of their feelings as a factor in our decision-making process. Tyler, David said carefully, you and Sarah are adults with your own lives. We didn't think we needed your permission to make decisions about our retirement. I'm not talking about permission, Tyler said. I'm talking about consideration. I'm talking about the fact that you're my parents and the idea of you moving across the country is scary and sad for me. And it would have been nice to be part of the conversation instead of finding out through a real estate listing. That hit me right in the chest because Tyler was right, again. We'd been so focused on our right to make independent decisions that we'd forgotten to consider the emotional impact those decisions might have on the people we loved most. You're right, I said quietly. We should have talked to you and Sarah months ago when we first started seriously considering this move. We should have included you in the conversation, even if the final decision was still ours to make. Thank you, Tyler said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. That's all I wanted, not to control your decision, just to be part of the process instead of finding out by accident. Amber had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up again. Can I ask about the timeline? You said the buyers want to close in 30 days. When did you accept their offer? Yesterday, David admitted. Yesterday, she repeated. So you accepted an offer to sell your house the day after Tyler and I moved out? The timing was coincidental, I said, but even I could hear how that sounded. Was it? Tyler asked. Or did our fight about boundaries give you the perfect excuse to move forward with a sale you'd been planning anyway? I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Because the truth was, Tyler and Amber moving in had definitely accelerated our timeline. Not because we were angry with them, but because their presence had made it clear that we needed to set firmer boundaries around our space and our independence. Honestly, I said finally, your moving in without asking made us realize that we needed to make this change sooner rather than later. Not because we were mad at you, but because it highlighted how easy it had become for our house to turn into a revolving door for family members who needed temporary solutions to their problems. So,
We were the last straw, Tyler said. You were the catalyst, David corrected. The straw that made us realize we'd been putting off a conversation we needed to have. Tyler nodded slowly, but I could see he was still processing everything. Okay, I can understand that. But I still wish you'd been honest with us about what was really going on. You're absolutely right, I said. We should have been upfront from the beginning. We owe you both an apology for letting you think this was about something else. Amber cleared her throat. But I hate to interrupt, but I need to ask a practical question. Tyler, what's our actual housing situation right now? Because Jake said we could stay for a few days, but if you need to be out of here in 30 days anyway, maybe we should be looking for something more permanent than crashing on couches. Tyler ran his hands through his hair. I don't know. I thought I had time to figure things out gradually, but now everything feels urgent. It is urgent, David said. Tyler, you're 26 years old. It's time to figure out a long-term plan instead of just bouncing from temporary solution to temporary solution. I know that, Tyler said, frustration creeping back into his voice, but it's not like I've been avoiding adult responsibilities on purpose. Do you know how expensive everything is right now? Do you know how competitive the rental market is? Yes, I said, we do know. That's part of why we're moving to Florida, where our retirement income will stretch further.
Right, Tyler said bitterly. So you get to escape to somewhere affordable, and Sarah and I get to figure out how to survive in one of the most expensive areas in the country. Tyler, David said, we're not escaping anything. We're making a practical decision about our retirement, and you and Sarah are adults who can make your own decisions about where to live and work. Can we, though? Tyler asked. I mean, realistically, can I afford to live anywhere else? My job is here, my friends are here, my whole life is here. It's not like I can just pack up and move to Florida, too. The conversation was getting heated again, and I could see that we were falling back into old patterns of Tyler feeling like a victim of circumstances beyond his control, and David and me feeling like Tyler was refusing to take responsibility for his own choices. Tyler, I said carefully, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to stay in a house we can't afford to maintain, in an area where we don't want to retire, just so you have somewhere to fall back on when things get difficult? No, he said immediately. Of course not. I want you to be happy and secure in your retirement. I just want to feel like my feelings matter to you, and I want to feel like you see me as someone who's trying his best instead of someone who's just looking for handouts. That stopped me short because I realized Tyler was right about something else. Somewhere along the way, David and I had started seeing our children's struggles as character flaws instead of as normal challenges that young adults face in a difficult economy. Tyler, I said slowly, you're right. We have been treating your housing situation like it's a reflection of poor planning on your part, instead of acknowledging that you're dealing with some genuinely difficult circumstances. Thank you, he said quietly. But, I continued, that doesn't change the fact that we can't be your long-term solution. We can acknowledge that the situation is difficult while still maintaining boundaries about what we can and can't provide. Tyler nodded. I get that. I do. I just wish we could have figured out a way to have this conversation without all the drama and hurt feelings. So do we, David said. And maybe that's something we can all learn from this situation. Better communication, clearer boundaries, more honest conversations about expectations. Amber had been quiet for several minutes, but now she spoke up. I feel like I should apologize again for being the catalyst for all this family drama. I never intended to cause problems between you and Tyler. Amber, I said, you didn't cause anything. You were just caught in the middle of a conversation Tyler and I should have had months ago. Still, she said, I feel bad about the whole thing. And I feel especially bad because I can see that Tyler's been dealing with a lot more stress about his living situation than he let on to me. Tyler looked at her with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, you've been presenting yourself as someone who had everything figured out, when actually you've been just as uncertain about your housing situation as I have been about mine, she said gently. Tyler, when you told me I can move in here, you were hoping it would work out, not knowing it would work out. You were taking a gamble with both our living situations. Tyler opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. You're right, he said finally. I was hoping it would work out.
I wanted to help you, and I wanted to feel like I had some kind of solution to offer, even though I didn't really have my own situation figured out. I appreciate that you wanted to help me, Amber said. But Tyler, we both need to be more honest about what we can actually provide for each other versus what we hope we might be able to provide. I found myself impressed with Amber again. She was handling this complicated situation with more emotional intelligence than I would have expected from someone her age. So where does that leave us? Tyler asked. Well, Amber said, it leaves us with 30 days to find actual sustainable housing solutions instead of just hoping temporary arrangements will somehow become permanent. And it leaves us with the knowledge that your parents are moving to Florida, which means you need to start thinking about your long-term plans for staying in this area or possibly exploring other options. Other options like what? Tyler asked. Amber shrugged. I don't know. Maybe there are opportunities in other cities where the cost of living is more reasonable. Maybe there are roommate situations that would make staying here more affordable. Maybe there are job opportunities that come with housing assistance or relocation packages. You mean like actually researching options instead of just hoping something will work out? Tyler said, and I could hear him starting to understand the difference between wishful thinking and practical planning. Exactly, Amber said. David and I looked at each other, and I could see that he was thinking the same thing I was. This conversation had been painful and complicated, but it had also been necessary. And maybe finally Tyler was starting to understand what it meant to approach adult problems with adult solutions. Tyler, I said, your father and I want to help you figure out a plan. Not by providing housing indefinitely, but by helping you think through your options and maybe providing some financial support for things like security deposits or moving expenses. Really? Tyler asked, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Really, David confirmed. But Tyler, this has to be a real plan with realistic timelines and backup options. No more hoping things will just work out. I understand, Tyler said, and I'm sorry for putting you in such an awkward position with the whole Amber situation. I should have asked first, and I should have been honest about not actually having permission instead of just assuming everything would be fine. Apology accepted, I said, and Tyler, we're sorry for not being upfront about our moving plans. You deserve to know what was happening in our lives, especially when it affected your living situation. Amber cleared her throat again. I hate to keep bringing up practical concerns, but I still need to figure out my own housing situation. Tyler, I appreciate everything you've tried to do for me, but I think I need to focus on finding my own solution instead of depending on arrangements that might not work out. What are you thinking? Tyler asked. I'm thinking I need to seriously consider relocating somewhere more affordable, she said.
Maybe take that job offer I got in Portland. The pay is lower, but the cost of living is so much better that I'd actually come out ahead. Portland's pretty far away, Tyler said quietly. It is, Amber agreed. But Tyler, I think we both need to be honest about whether this relationship is ready for the kind of major life decisions we've been making. Moving in together, coordinating our housing searches, planning our futures around each other. Maybe we've been trying to fast-track things because of practical pressures instead of because we're actually ready for that level of commitment. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Tyler looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Are you breaking up with me? He asked. I'm suggesting that maybe we should both focus on getting our individual lives figured out before we try to build a shared life together, Amber said gently. Tyler, you need to figure out your housing and your career plans and your relationship with your parents. I need to figure out my housing and my career and my long-term goals. Maybe once we've both done that work, we'll be in a better position to decide if we want to do life together. It was a remarkably mature perspective from someone who is 25 years old. I found myself respecting Amber more and more as this conversation continued. So, you are breaking up with me, Tyler said, and his voice was small and hurt. I'm saying I think we should take a step back and focus on ourselves for a while, Amber corrected. That doesn't mean I don't care about you or that I'm not open to the possibility of trying again in the future when we're both more settled. Tyler nodded, but I could see that he was struggling with this development. When would you leave for Portland? Probably within the next couple of weeks, Amber said.
The job starts the 1st of next month, and I need time to find an apartment and get settled. That's really soon, Tyler said. It is, Amber agreed. But honestly, Tyler, staying here and trying to make this work when neither of us has stable housing or clear future plans isn't fair to either of us. David and I sat quietly during this exchange, recognizing that our kitchen had become the setting for some major life decisions that had nothing to do with us. But it was interesting to watch Tyler process the reality that his girlfriend was handling this crisis with more practical wisdom than he'd been able to muster. I guess I understand, Tyler said. I don't like it, but I understand it. I'm sorry, Amber said. I know this adds another layer of complication to an already difficult situation. Actually, Tyler said slowly, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it simplifies things. If you're moving to Portland, then I don't have to worry about finding housing for 2 people. I just have to worry about finding housing for myself. That's true, Amber said. And Tyler, you're smart and capable, and you have people who care about you. You're going to figure this out. I hope so, Tyler said. You will, I said firmly. Tyler, you're going to figure this out because you're going to approach it systematically instead of hoping for the best. You're going to research your options, make realistic budgets, and have honest conversations with potential roommates or landlords about what you can provide and what you need from them. And you're going to do it in the next 30 days, David added, because that's your deadline. Tyler took a deep breath. Okay, 30 days to find housing, figure out a long-term plan, and start acting like the adult I'm supposed to be. You don't have to do it alone, I said. Your father and I are here to help with advice, with research, with reasonable financial support. We're just not here to provide indefinite housing while you figure things out. I understand, Tyler said. And honestly, maybe that's what I need. Maybe I've been using the safety net as an excuse to avoid making difficult decisions. Maybe you have, David agreed, but recognizing that is the first step toward changing it. Amber stood up from the table. I should probably start making some phone calls about Portland. And Tyler, I should probably stay somewhere else tonight so you can have some space to process all this. Where will you go? Tyler asked. I have a friend from work who said I could crash on her couch if I needed to. I should probably take her up on that offer. Amber, I said, before you go, I want to say something. You've handled this entire situation with remarkable maturity and insight. Tyler is lucky to have had your perspective through all of this, even if things don't work out between you romantically. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. And thank you for being so patient with this whole mess. I know we turned your quiet Tuesday morning into a family therapy session. Sometimes that's what families need. Uncomfortable conversations that force everyone to be honest about what's really going on. After Amber left, Tyler sat at our kitchen table looking shock-shelled. That was a lot, he said finally. It was, I agreed. How are you feeling about everything? Tyler thought for a long moment. Overwhelmed, scared, but also kind of relieved, I think. Like, at least now I know what I'm actually dealing with, instead of just hoping things will work out somehow. That's a good way to look at it, David said. Mom, Dad, can I ask you something else? Of course. When you move to Florida, will you miss us? Will you miss being close enough for family dinners and holiday visits and all?
The question was so vulnerable and honest that it broke my heart a little. Tyler, I said, of course we'll miss you. We'll miss being close to you and Sarah. We'll miss the spontaneous visits and the family dinners and being able to help with emergencies. But we'll also be excited about starting this new chapter of our lives. And we hope you'll be excited about it too. We're not moving to Florida because we don't want to be around you, David added. We're moving to Florida because we want to build a retirement that's sustainable and enjoyable for us. And we hope that having parents who are happy and financially secure will ultimately be better for you than having parents who are stressed and overextended. Tyler nodded. I think I understand that. And I think I understand why you needed to set boundaries about the housing situation, even though it was hard to hear. Good, I said. Because, Tyler, Setting boundaries doesn't mean we love you less. It means we love you enough to help you become fully independent instead of accidentally enabling you to avoid growing up. I'm 26, Tyler said. I should already be grown up. Growing up is a process, not an event, David said, and everyone's timeline is different. But Tyler, at some point, you have to take full responsibility for your own life instead of expecting other people to provide backup plans when things get difficult. I know, Tyler said. And honestly, maybe losing the safety net will force me to get creative about solutions instead of just falling back on family help whenever things get complicated. Maybe it will, I agreed. Tyler stood up from the table. I should probably head back to Jake's place and start making some phone calls. Apartment hunting, job searching, all that fun stuff. Tyler, I said, remember what we talked about. This doesn't have to be a solo mission. Your father and I are happy to help with research, to provide references for rental applications, to help you think through your options. We just can't be your housing solution. I know, Tyler said, and I appreciate that. I appreciate having your support, even if I can't have your guest room indefinitely. After Tyler left, David and I sat in our kitchen feeling emotionally exhausted, but also oddly relieved. That was intense, David said. It was, I agreed, but I think it was necessary, all of it. Do you think Tyler will actually figure things out this time? Or do you think he'll end up back here in a few weeks asking for another extension? I thought about that question seriously. I think Tyler learned something important today about the difference between hoping things will work out and actually making them work out. And I think Amber's decision to move to Portland instead of trying to make an impossible situation work might be the wake-up call he needed about approaching problems practically instead of optimistically. I hope you're right, David said. I think I am, I said. And David, I think we learned something important too about the difference between helping our kids and enabling them, and about the importance of honest communication, even when those conversations are difficult. Agreed, David said. Though I have to admit, I'm a little worried about how Sarah's going to react when we tell her about Florida. Sarah's going to react however Sarah's going to react, I said. But David, we can't make major life decisions based on trying to manage our adult children's emotional responses. We can be considerate of their feelings, but we can't let those feelings dictate our choices. True, David said. And who knows, maybe Sarah will surprise us. Maybe she'll be excited about having parents who are happy and independent instead of stressed and overcommitted. Maybe she will, I agreed. 3 weeks later, Tyler called to tell us he'd found a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate he'd met through work. The rent was higher than he'd wanted to pay, but he'd also gotten a promotion that made it manageable. He sounded different on the phone, more confident, more settled, more like an adult who was handling his own life instead of hoping someone else would handle it for him. I have to admit, Tyler said during that phone call, at first I was really angry about the whole situation. I felt like you guys had set me up to fail by not telling me about Florida earlier. But honestly, I think I needed to be pushed into actually solving my own problems instead of just hoping they'd somehow solve themselves. How are things with Amber? I asked. She's good, Tyler said. We've been texting and she really likes Portland. She said making the decision to move there was scary but also liberating because it forced her to focus on what she actually wanted instead of what seemed convenient. That sounds healthy, I said. It was, Tyler said. And Mom, I owe you and Dad an apology. I've been thinking a lot about that conversation we had, and I realize I was treating your house like my personal backup plan instead of respecting it as your home. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't mature. Accepted, I said. And Tyler, your father and I owe you an apology, too, for not being upfront about our moving plans from the beginning. Thanks, Tyler said. So when do you guys actually leave for Florida? Next month, I said. The closing is scheduled for the 15th, and we'll drive down the following week. I'm going to miss you, Tyler said quietly. We're going to miss you too. But Tyler, this isn't goodbye forever. It's just the beginning of a new phase where we're all more independent and self-sufficient. And I think that's going to be good for all of us. I think you're right, Tyler said. And Mom, thanks for not letting me take the easy way out.
I needed to learn how to solve my own problems, even if it was uncomfortable. You're welcome, I said. And Tyler, we're proud of you for finding the apartment, for handling the situation with Amber so maturely, for approaching this whole thing like an adult instead of like a teenager who's been grounded. I'm proud of me too, Tyler said, and I could hear the smile in his voice.
After we hung up, I realized that Tyler was right about needing to be pushed into solving his own problems. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to make their life easier in ways that prevent them from growing up. Sometimes boundaries aren't punishment. They're gifts that force people to discover what they're capable of handling on their own. The house sold 3 days ahead of schedule, and David and I were packed and ready to leave for Florida by the end of the month. On our last day in Millfield Heights, both Tyler and Sarah came over for dinner. Sarah had initially been upset about our move, but she'd also started talking about relocating to Denver, where several of her friends had moved and where her marketing skills would be more valuable in a growing job market. I have to admit, Sarah said over dessert, knowing that you guys won't be here as a backup plan is forcing me to think more seriously about what I actually want my life to look like instead of what seems easiest. That's exactly what happened to me, Tyler said. It turns out I'm a lot more capable of handling my own problems than I thought I was. We always knew you were capable, David said. We just forgot that proving it to yourselves required us to step back and let you handle things independently. Well, Sarah said, raising her wine glass, here's to new chapters for everyone, and to parents who love us enough to refuse to enable us indefinitely. And to children who are brave enough to build their own lives instead of waiting for someone else to build them, I added. As we drove away from Millfield Heights the next morning, I found myself thinking about that awkward breakfast conversation that had started this whole chain of events. Amber making coffee in our kitchen without permission had felt like such a violation at the time. But looking back, I could see that it had been the catalyst for conversations that needed to happen anyway. Sometimes the most inconvenient interruptions turn out to be exactly what you need to force important changes that you've been avoiding. Sometimes a stranger in your kitchen at 6 in the morning is the universe's way of telling you it's time to stop putting off the difficult conversations and start being honest about what you actually want from life. 6 months later, Tyler sent us a photo of his apartment in Millfield Heights. It was small but nicely furnished, and he looked genuinely proud standing in his own living room. Amber had sent a similar photo from Portland, where she'd been promoted and was loving her new city. Sarah had indeed moved to Denver and was thriving in a marketing job that paid twice what she'd been making back home. David and I were settled in our retirement community in Florida, making new friends and enjoying a lifestyle that revolved around our own interests instead of everyone else's crises. We talked to the kids regularly, but those conversations were different now. Instead of calls about housing emergencies or financial crises, we talked about their jobs, their hobbies, their dating lives, their plans for the future. You know what I realized? David said one evening as we sat on our lanai watching the sunset. We spent so many years being available for emergencies that we forgot how to just be proud of our kids for handling their normal, everyday lives. That's true, I said. And I think they forgot how to be proud of themselves for handling normal, everyday challenges. We were all so focused on crisis management that we lost sight of the fact that being a successful adult is mostly about managing the non-crisis parts of life. Do you ever regret how we handled the whole situation with Tyler and Amber? David asked. I thought about that question seriously. I regret that it took so long for us to have honest conversations about boundaries and expectations. I regret that Tyler felt blindsided by our moving plans. But no, I don't regret refusing to let them move in indefinitely. I think that was the right decision for everyone involved. Even though it was uncomfortable and messy and emotionally difficult, especially because it was uncomfortable, messy, and emotionally difficult, I said. David, comfortable conversations don't usually lead to growth, and all of us needed to grow in different ways. Tyler needed to learn how to solve his own problems, David said. Amber needed to learn how to make decisions based on what was actually possible, instead of what she hoped might be possible. And we needed to learn how to support our adult children without enabling them, and how to prioritize our own needs without feeling guilty about it. Exactly, I said. And none of that would have happened if we just let them move in and hoped everything would work out eventually. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Sometimes it is, I agreed. As we sat there watching the Florida sunset, I found myself grateful for that awkward Tuesday morning when I'd walked into my kitchen and found a stranger making coffee. Not because I'd enjoyed the experience, but because it had forced all of us to stop avoiding difficult conversations and start being honest about what we actually needed from each other. Sometimes the biggest disruptions lead to the most necessary changes. Sometimes saying no to what people want from you is the same thing as saying yes to what they actually need. And sometimes the uncomfortable conversations are the ones that set everyone free to build the lives they actually want, instead of the lives they think they're supposed to want. Tyler and Amber had learned that hoping things would work out wasn't the same as making them work out. David and I had learned that boundaries weren't barriers to loving relationships. They were the foundation of healthy ones. And all of us had learned that growing up sometimes requires letting go of the safety nets that make growth feel less necessary. It had been messy and emotional and sometimes painful. But 6 months later, everyone was happier, more independent, and more honest about their needs and capabilities. Sometimes that's what love looks like. Not making people's lives easier, but helping them become strong enough to handle their own challenges with confidence and competence. That morning, when I discovered Amber in my kitchen, changed everything. What started as an unwelcome surprise became the wake-up call our family desperately needed. Tyler learned that independence means solving your own problems, not expecting others to provide endless safety nets. Amber discovered that practical decisions often lead to better outcomes than wishful thinking. David and I realized that loving our children sometimes means refusing to enable their avoidance of adult responsibilities. Today, everyone lives independently and happily. Sometimes the most uncomfortable disruptions force the most necessary growth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.